Yeah. Okay.
Two roads diverge in a yellow wood. I'm feeling real good.
I cannot improvise like you.
Oh.
And you're reading about Ryman right now.
Ryman B. Simon?
Ryman B. Simon.
Simon B. Ryman. Okay. Hey, Aaron, how's it going today?
I'm good, RC. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm feeling quite poetic, and that's why I'm talking about two roads diverging in a yellow wood. But I'd rather talk to someone who is an actual poet.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good because today on the show we have Donna Kane.
Yes.
Donna Kane is the recipient of the Aurora Award of Distinction, Arts and Culture, and the British Columbia Medal of Good Citizenship. Her poems, short fiction, reviews, and essays have been published widely. She is the author of the nonfiction book Summer of the Horse and of 3 books of poetry. Orrery, I'm never quite sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
You got it.
Was a finalist for the 2020 Governor General's Literary Award, and her most recent collection is called Asterisms, which came out earlier in 2024. She divides her time between Rolla, BC, and Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Can't wait to hear more about asterisms and the poetic process. So here's Donna Kane.
Okay. Welcome, Donna,
Thank
to
you.
the King's Further Reading podcast. It's great to have you here. You're back in Halifax. Maybe we can talk about that. First of all, I'll just give a little background info. Donna and I are both from BC originally. Donna's from the kind of, it's almost like a mystery region of the province, the Northeast.
Northeast.
Yeah.
It's
Do you
very.
want to expand on that?
Sure. I mean, we're closer to Alberta than we are to probably any other community other than like Dawson Creek proper. And we're over the Rocky Mountains and it flattens out. So it becomes very prairie-like. And so the industry, everything is like quite different than the rest of BC. And yeah.
Yeah, for sure. The first time I went there, it wasn't until I was in my 20s. And there were like grain elevators, and there were parts with lots of rolling hills, but there were very flat areas too. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was
Lorna
different.
Crozier, the poet, said she has been up there many times for readings, and she has said that Northeast BC is the closest BC gets to Saskatchewan.
Oh.
And that's partly why she liked to come up. It reminded her of Saskatchewan.
Yeah, cool.
And so here's my rookie question. You cannot see mountains where you are? Even in the distance?
Where I am in Rolla, no. But if you go where I grew up, which is in Besborough, which is about 40 minutes west, you can see the foothills very faintly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then speaking of seeing things from a distance, Donna and I are Facebook friends, and she is a great Facebook poster, I'd say.
Oh.
One of the few left. And this summer, you were spending time sleeping outside. Did that start? And that's for a writing project you're working on.
Well, it didn't start out as a writing project. It was during the pandemic, and I was isolated in my yard. Wayne was up with his pack string because he was allowed to do that because it was outdoors. But I was still...
To dive in,
Yeah.
Donna's husband, Wayne, has
It's an ecotourism business where he takes people in on horseback to the Musqueam management area, which is one of the few intact wilderness areas left on the planet.
Wow.
And so he brings them in just to raise awareness of the area, should there ever come a time when the government decides they want to move in.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was gone. I was still having to go to like the grocery stores to buy supplies and whatnot, and you're still masked up and everything. And then I would come home to my yard, and it was just isolating and stressful. And one night I just decided I needed to be in a more open space, so I slept outside, and it changed me. It's my 5th summer now, and I sleep outside every summer. It's amazing.
Okay, so writing has come out of this already.
Yes, and then after I started doing it, I started making notes about it. I started doing research into night sky and the alarming increase of light pollution and the impacts on nocturnal life. And so then I started writing, and in this case it was nonfiction. And I've got a hodgepodge of a manuscript together, and it's just being looked at by an editor. So
I think that's really exciting. And could you mention that stat that you mentioned
yes,
to me earlier?
in 2003. So the sort of recognition of the loss of our night sky is only sort of starting to gain real attention. But in 2023, so last year, they released a study where they said only 1 in 5 North Americans can still see the Milky Way.
Wow.
Isn't that shocking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking that's a statistic you can build a whole book around, a whole project. I think a lot of people would be interested in that.
Yeah.
The one thing that stood out to me when I saw a picture of your bed, it was in a CBC article, and it had the comforter and it looked like a really comfortable bed. And I love sleeping outside as well, usually in a tent. But what's the dew factor like where you live? Because I've woken up outside soaking wet before.
Yeah, I would say here you definitely would. I mean, even walking to the studio, my hair was getting wet from the mist.
Yeah.
But Rolla is very arid, and on the deck, like we don't hardly get even mosquitoes on the deck because it's so dry. Okay. If you go out into the gardens, you can get more of that. But yeah, it's only would be as we get closer to the end of fall, like maybe end of September, October, that you might start getting dew, and then you just deal with it.
Yeah.
How's the hodgepodge nonfiction manuscript going? Can you talk about that a bit more?
Well, I'm hoping to find out in about a week because that's when my editor's going to bring it back to me. And I guess when I say hodgepodge, it's kind of a mix of the experience of sleeping outside, it's light pollution, it's nocturnal life, and then it's just the day-to-day passing of life through the seasons from when I first start to sleep outside in April to when I stop in October. So, yeah, and I just keep inputting things because I would say the overall theme is the way in which we see the world and the way we don't see the world and how our sight of the night sky is being lost. And with that, all the cultures that used the night sky for their science, and that's how they survived in their world. And now I think most of us, if we asked like where's the North Star, I'm not sure how many of us would actually know which. I mean, I have heard some people say, well, they ask people and they say Jupiter because as a planet is sometimes the brightest thing they can see. So yeah, we just lost our knowledge, and I have too. I mean, I don't know a lot about it. I mean, I'm reading, but when I started the project, I didn't know very much.
That to me, I've read a little bit more about you. I think you taught a course or you did a seminar on poetic awareness. And
right.
When I saw that term, I really loved it because knowing that you sleep outside and then reading your poetry, your senses seem to be wide open. So how do you feel about poetic awareness, and how can we gain more of it?
Well, I did borrow that term from Don Mackay, poet, and he talks a lot about poetic attention. And that is just basically paying more closer attention to your sensory world, so the material world out there, and actually looking at things like, even if you looked at, say, this plastic cup, it came from, fossils. Mm-hmm. It was at one time sea creatures of some sort, and now we've kind of made it trapped in this thing that is now, polluting the planet. Mm-hmm. But it comes from life, and it's just like looking at everything in that way, and looking even at the shapes of things, and sort of trying to look anew, I guess, just paying really close attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Paying attention and stuff like that. Do you find you can only do it slowly? I
think there is a kind of unraveling that needs to happen because we are so used to seeing things a certain way, and it takes time to sort of, and you're never going to completely, but to sort of peel away those preconceptions and the way you have always perceived things, and then try to see it in a brand new way with a little more focus and whatnot.
I like to operate that way, and right now things are busy and we have little kids and stuff like that. And so sometimes it's just like I'll notice something and it's just like, oh, file it away. Like try to jot down a thought about it later. And it's but do you find yourself in those moments where you can still sort of quickly tune into something?
I think particularly at night. I mean, I think that's one of the wonderful things about sleeping outside is like when the day is done and things have been really busy and I haven't probably been paying or able to pay that kind of attention. But then once I get into my bed and you start settling in, and then you start to hear which birds are flitting around, which ones are like, bickering at each other. You hear a coyote in the everything just kind of opens up, because I always look at it as I become the stimuli, like rather than me going out and, naming and doing all these things and interacting. The world now starts interacting with me because I'm just laying there.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great perks for sure.
Huh. Yeah.
And that's what a line that jumped out to me was, "We've weeded out wonder," in the poem where you're kind of talking directly to the moon about how it's not going to be in people's imagination as much anymore once we kind of colonize it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and I love that line because you clearly have a deep knowledge of the science of optics, and
I would say like a passing.
Or passion.
Knowledge.
A passing knowledge. Okay. I have a passing knowledge as well. I taught it at the grade 8 level, so I just know,
okay.
I know a little bit about light, but not a deep amount. But reading through the book Asterisms, all the references to light, right. And this idea of how can we have science over here and scientific inquiry, and also keep our wonder and our imagination open to new things. Is that something that you
I actually think that like poetry or any kind of creative aspect and science are very closely related, because that's how both things get created or produced, is through our curiosity and through our imagination. So I myself find that the more I learn about, say, the electromagnetic spectrum, the more wonder there is in that. So science for me is like super important in my writing, and it does help me see the wonder. Colonizing the moon, that's something we've done with our science, but not necessarily. I mean, because one of the things about also sleeping outside is when you look up at the sky, that all the universe beyond us, other than the moon and I guess Mars to a point, is unaffected by us. All our troubles are not their concern. And that's, to me, a solace to be able to look at something that is not affected by the things that we do that are harmful. Yeah.
I was looking through Asterisms again, and the side-by-side poems on avoidance and on certainty. It was very much your point of view. The reader got a sense of who you were, like a little jolt of that in the middle. Do you think about how the types of poems are arranged in a collection like this to sort of give the reader an insight into, this one's about me, deal with me for a second, then we'll get back to the bugs and the wind.
Well,
and stuff.
in the past I've always had to have an editor help me order my poems. I've always found that very difficult.
Yeah.
This one I ordered, and the editors that went through it were like, no, I think there's very few poems that they switched positions of, but I never really intentionally, I guess I wasn't really thinking why I was doing it, but possibly subconsciously I was doing that.
Yeah. And then going back, going way back, what were your earliest memories of wanting to be a writer or interest in books, that sort of thing?
Well, I think I was writing stories and making little books since I knew how to read and write. When I was 12 years old, there was the Western Producer. So if you're in Western Canada, if you're in a farming community, every farming family had the Western Producer. And there was a section in there called the Young Cooperators Club, and it was for kids that wanted to send in their writing.
Oh, cool.
And so I did that like right up until I graduated from high school. I was still sending in my writing to the Western producer.
And you'd see it in print?
Yeah, I mean, you'd run to the mailbox because my sister also was what they called a young co-op. And you would run to the mailbox to see who could get the Western producer first to see if they'd published one of your pieces. So,
do you remember how often it came out?
it was every Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's actually a Facebook page of the Young Cooperators Club. All, of course, gotten old, but they still communicate, and a lot of them have gone on to become published writers.
And so right up through high school.
Yeah.
And then after that, what happened?
Well, then after that, I thought, well, that was kind of an adolescent pursuit, and I didn't feel I had the ability to do it in a serious way, so I just didn't do it for probably until I was about 30, and I took a creative writing class at the college, and the instructor at the end of the class stopped me and said, I think you have what it takes to do this professionally. And that was all I needed to hear.
Wow.
Was someone to say, you can do this.
In that intervening years.
I think I wrote a few things, but nothing that I would do. I wrote a journal, every day.
Okay.
But no real poetry. So it wasn't until I was around 30 that I started to.
Your parents, did they have any interest in the arts?
My father, was very musical. So he played the banjo and the fiddle. And my mom was a librarian. So she loved books and was always bringing books home.
So there were seeds there.
There were
sure.
seeds for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. And then when you heard that from your prof, that sounds like it was sort of a light let in or something. Something along those lines.
Yeah, for sure. And he's remained good friends. In fact, a few weeks ago, before I came to Halifax, he came to my house and brought me all his books from when he was doing his PhD at UNB in Fredericton. So
he brought them all here?
No, to my house in Rolla.
Oh,
he was
okay.
trying to. I think it was, how we're all doing that Swedish death purge, or
Yes.
whatever, as we get older, and he didn't know what to do with them. So he brought them to me, and I'm like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do with them either. But it was a very, very nice thing for him to do.
Swedish death foisting.
Yeah, that's right.
That sounds like a cop-out. And then also sort of earlier years, I think we've talked about this, Donna, outside of here, but looking back on early work and feelings about it.
I mean, definitely there's some really bad poems that I was writing. We all do. We still do, right? I mean, it doesn't ever really go away. But when I look at that first book, I don't mind it. Like it was a different kind of writing that I was doing, but I think because I had been writing for, all through my youth, and then I was fortunate to go to Banff and Sage Hill and meet some really excellent mentors.
What was the second one? Sage Hill?
Sage Hill, that's in Saskatchewan.
Okay.
Yeah. And so a lot of those poems had been like fairly well edited when they were published, even though it was quite a long time ago. Yeah.
So for asterisms, I'm curious about when you have enough poems to, I guess, submit a manuscript, and then how many do you end up cutting? So how many poems were in the collection, first of all? Approximately.
They probably took out about 10 and then put a few more in. I'm a very slow writer, so once I get around 40 poems, and I try to cobble them together. I'm not a fast writer.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So not until you have that critical mass of poems you start thinking of it as a collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Neat.
And then there's always I think the themes have been pretty much the same since my very first book, which is the natural material world. And then as the years have gone by since Sleeping Outside, I've moved more towards science and the universe. And my last book, Orrery, was about Pioneer 10, which was a space probe that was launched by NASA in 1972. So now I'm kind of onto that whole thing for a while. Yeah,
That's
we'll
what I
see.
got from On Visible Light, which is the poem that opens Asterisms, but it's a prologue poem of sorts.
Well, you know what? It's actually a villanelle. And
Yeah. I think Villanelle have 14. It's supposed to have 14 lines.
yeah, and they go like I guess 4 3s and then a 2.
Yeah.
But we didn't get the spaces in there, and I never noticed. So it certainly wasn't the publisher's fault. It was that I didn't notice in the proof that we didn't have the spacing in there. And it wasn't. It was actually Brian Bartlett here in Halifax that said, "How come you didn't put spaces in your Villanelle?" And I'm like, "Oh, I never even noticed it until now."
Big faux pas.
Yeah.
But I love the repeating line that knowledge is the fruiting body of light. At first time I read it, it didn't maybe land with me, but then by the end of the poem, when I saw it for the 4th time, and thinking about light coming from, so far away and how long it takes to get here, and then finally, the knowledge is like looking at a reflection of something that creates knowledge in the reader. I just like where your poem took me.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was really nice, really nice.
And speaking of this kind of stuff, language poems, lyric poems, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, because I'm not what might be called a language poet, I may not have this right. So, I can be corrected. But my sense of it is that language poetry is interested in how language conveys information or meaning, and how our syntax is such that a lot of the meaning that we get from when we read, we almost absorb without thinking about it. And by taking words and maybe breaking them up, disrupting that syntax a bit, forces the reader to kind of make their own meaning out of the work, and so it asks a little more participation of the reader. Whereas I would say lyric poetry is like, I've already had my epiphany, and now I'm going to
Here it is.
tell you how it was for me. And so a language poet would say, well, it's up to the reader to derive their whatever meaning out of there. But for me, I do believe there is meaning in the world, and there's meaning in the natural world. So I continue to write lyric poetry, but I totally respect and am interested in all the different
Who are
ways.
do you have an example of a language poet's work that you enjoy, or that tends to write more in that mode?
Erin Moray writes fantastic poetry. I don't know if she would call herself a language poet. I'm not entirely sure, but I think so.
I hope we're not sewering you to the poetry community that they're going to get a hold of this. And
Yeah, so she's wonderful. And I don't know if Jaspreet Singh would think of himself as a language poet, but I just have his most recent collection. And like his voice is sure and you believe it. So even though the words themselves might not be in sort of a narrative way, there's a truth that comes out of those words, and it's quite remarkable.
And that I want to talk about enjambment.
Yeah.
Because I love where you split, where you end lines, and sometimes you'll split a phrase in half. So I know that's intentional, but when you're actually writing a poem, do you find you edit for enjambment later on, or do you tend to get those splits right as you're drafting?
I would say in the editing process mostly. Yeah.
enjambment. Sorry, guys.
Breaking a phrase apart at the
Like
end.
where you're
At
gonna
a
stop.
line, at a line break, and then
And even starting a new stanza with
Okay.
the second half of that phrase.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there's two things that when you are breaking that line to think about. And George Murray, who he's in St. John's, and he runs a writing program online, and he's a great teacher of the basics of poetry. And I took his course after publishing Orrery because I wasn't writing, and I thought, I just need to learn how to write poetry again. So I took it, and it was great. But one of the things he will tell you is like always end your line on a strong word, and that really helps in the editing process. Don't end with of or and or.
That's a pretty hard and
conjunctions.
fast rule, I guess.
Yeah, and then sometimes you can break it in a fun way so that it changes its meaning if you break it.
Yeah.
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 I was also curious about being here in Halifax versus out in Rolla. It's quite a contrast. These
Yeah, it's
two
quite
lives
different.
you live.
Yeah. I mean, here I can see the moon,
Yeah.
and sometimes I can see a planet or two, but that's about it in the city. I mean, I know you guys have dark sky preserves in the province, but yeah. So what I find is I'm probably writing about pigeons and starlings, the
Are they
the
like
inflatable
second
decorations.
string nature, or is it all?
I guess I tend to still be looking at the natural world as much as anything. I have a few about nearly getting whacked by a truck on a crosswalk or something. But yeah, so the subjects, because I am a lyric poet, and so my poems usually start by something I've experienced or sensed. So yeah, in asterisms, you can see some poems that are definitely written in Halifax.
Oh,
Yeah.
neat.
What's it like getting here?
Well, I'm not a morning person, so the first thing is a 4-hour time difference. Like when I get up at like 8 Halifax time, it's still 4 in the morning in Rolla. So it takes me at least a week to kind of get used to that time change. And then, I don't know, for me it's exciting because you got so many great little shops, and it's easier to get like really good produce and
Yeah.
specialty items you can't get in Rolla.
But I guess I'm thinking of things like noise and rude people and these sorts of things. Are you more sensitive to that at all? Or are you just sort of right back into life? And like you said, you have grandkids here. And
I mean,
stuff,
everyone here is always so friendly.
Yeah.
And Halifax is lovely, and I feel so fortunate that I can spend time here because, Rolla, Dawson Creek doesn't have a lot of, literary things going on. But here, there's always a reading you can attend, or the bookstores. Bookmark is amazing. So, I love it.
And I haven't done my research into what Northern Lights College is, but I do know that you teach creative writing there.
I don't haven't for a few years,
Oh,
but
okay.
I have
taught.
yeah, I have
Okay.
taught. Yeah.
Is that where is that?
Well, it's
college?
the main campus is in Dawson Creek. It's become more of a technology based college and in trades. But they do offer the first 2 years of university transfer, and then sometimes they'll throw in the creative writing class.
I'm picturing maybe students who had to do something like this as a elective for another degree. Did you have a lot of sort of disinterested? I'm
Actually,
hoping you had lots of enthusiasm.
I had a lot
too.
no, I think they were all super interested, and it was
good.
fun for them because it was kind of a departure from
Oh yeah.
some of the more heavier subjects. And Helen Knott, who is now like an A-list writer, she took my creative writing class many years ago, and she stood out then. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of writers in there, and I would say others too that went on to, at least write seriously, if not, publishing in the trade.
Yeah.
Publishing.
Yeah. Something I find when I go back to northwestern BC is the culture of the area is maybe not as arts friendly as it is in a city like Halifax, and I think there can be a value to feeling like you're swimming upstream a little bit.
Yeah. Dawson Creek, for whatever reason, has a really strong arts community and lots of visual artists, lots of musicians who've gone on to do really well, and some that are remaining in Rolla, Dawson Creek, and are doing, really well. The literary world has not been quite as robust, I would say. And one of the perks is that there isn't the critical mass of any artistic discipline, so we all hang out together because so the visual artists, musicians, the writers are all, one
right.
group.
Yeah.
For 20 years, probably more than that, I was doing Canada Council funded readings and helped organize a Sweetwater 905 festival and other writing retreats, festivals. So for those 20 years, it was super busy literary wise. But then just after the pandemic, I quit, and there hasn't really been anyone who's sort of picked that up in a way in which they're bringing writers in from outside. And so I'm feeling it more now that, before I felt like it was quite, active, and I was meeting all these writers, but now it's been pretty quiet.
And true of those small places where it's very much, this person really likes this, they will create a whole scene around it. Whereas in the city, it's a little more likely that somebody's maybe waiting in the wings. That's
Exactly.
ready to,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think it was Tim Lilburn who, he wasn't talking specifically about Dawson Creek, but just in general, these little communities that do have a fairly vibrant reading series. And he called it kind of like a drive-through culture. So,
Right.
Okay.
It's like it's there, but the people aren't staying. They're,
Right.
They're just coming and going, which is still
they've been
very
stationed there for
very beneficial. But
Yeah.
but there isn't really a core group.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really curious about how you're crossing genre between poetry and nonfiction. How do you operate differently when you're, let's say, in a poetry writing mode, or do you write both at the same time? What's happening right now with your mix?
I tend to, like, if I'm focusing on poetry, then that's where my head is going. Right now I'm working on the nonfiction book, but if a poem comes along, then I'll stop and work on the poem. I think, when you think about it and you look at the nonfiction writers out there, or maybe a better way of approaching it is poets. A lot of poets write nonfiction. There are some for sure, but poets don't generally veer into fiction as much. They say it seems like nonfiction is a better fit with poetry because you can use poetic language and you're drilling down to a subject and exploring it in every way you can.
Yeah.
And maybe the narrative is not always quite as strong. I'm not sure. Having said that, there's lots of poets who are now also writing fiction. But it does seem like for a lot of us, nonfiction is not that hard a leap.
Right. I like that.
Yeah. I think we're probably, You're like, get me out of here.
No. This has been great. I don't get to talk about these things very much.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, we love it too. And thanks very much for coming in, Donna.
Yes.
And before we go, actually, there's usually something we ask. Ryan usually asks it. I'll see if I can nail it the way he does. So the theme is in theory about craft. Do you have any tips to help you get moving or whatever phase of the process it is, from editing to the very beginning?
I'm usually the one hoping to get some advice, but I don't know. I think it's like, for me, a lot of thinking goes on ahead before I start putting too much on the page. Sometimes I find if I try to write the poem too soon, without spending time jotting down notes and thinking about what it is I'm trying to say, then it kind of falls dead. So giving it time to sort of germinate, I guess. And then I guess on the other hand, writing out stuff and not worrying about how good or bad it is. And at least you've got something to work with and kind of chisel something out of it.
Yeah, that's great advice. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Donna.
Thanks, Donna. Further Reading is produced by the University of King's College MFA program, overseen by the great Gillian Turnbull. I edit it, Aaron Williams, that's me. Music is by Pete Johnson. Graphics are by Mike Smith. On the other side of the room from me is
R.C. Shaw over here.
Thanks a lot. We'll talk again soon.